The air in Grandma Eleanor's brownstone was always heavy with history, but on that particular day, it felt suffocating. It was filled with the hushed whispers of family members, the rustle of expensive clothes, and the barely contained anticipation of a will reading. Grandma Eleanor had passed away 2 weeks prior, leaving behind a legacy that everyone believed was purely financial. I sat quietly in a velvet armchair, a little apart from the others, feeling just as I always had in this house, invisible. Mr. Harrison, the family lawyer, a man with kind eyes but a very serious demeanor, cleared his throat. He had been Grandma Eleanor's confidant for decades, handling every family legal matter with unwavering precision. He began to read, his voice clear and formal, detailing properties in New York, investments, business holdings, and trusts. Names were called, and a sense of greedy satisfaction rippled through the room with each announcement. My cousin, Gavin, the golden child, received the lion's share. My elder sister, Olivia, was next, her portion still substantial. Other cousins and aunts received their shares too. My heart was a heavy stone in my chest. I knew what was coming, or rather, what wasn't. But even knowing, the words still landed with a quiet thud. Finally, Mr. Harrison paused, looking over his spectacles. "And to Clara," he said, his gaze briefly meeting mine. "Grandma Eleanor leaves nothing, save for her deep affections, as expressed in a private letter." A collective sigh, a ripple of sympathetic murmurs went through the room. Nothing. That's what it felt like. Nothing. Just a letter. The phrase deep affections felt like a cruel joke, a polite way of saying I was irrelevant. My long-held belief of her disfavor, of my place as the family outsider, was publicly confirmed. Gavin, ever the charmer, walked over and patted my shoulder, his smile a little too wide. "Tough break, sis," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "Maybe time to get a real job, eh? That pottery thing isn't exactly a retirement plan." He winked, and a few family members chuckled softly. Olivia gave me a fleeting, pitying look. She meant well, I think, but she wouldn't challenge Gavin, not ever. I just nodded, unable to speak. The air felt thin. I wanted to disappear, to vanish from that elegant, judging room. The weight of their gazes, the quiet, almost gentle dismissal, was worse than any harsh word. It confirmed what I had always felt. In this family, I simply didn't measure up. I spent most of my childhood and adolescence feeling like an enigma to Grandma Eleanor. She was a formidable woman, sharp-witted and incredibly astute, having built a successful artisanal textile collective in her younger days. But in her later years, her focus seemed to narrow to purely financial achievements. She always praised Gavin for his straight A's, his internships at big banks, his business mind. My academic performance was decent enough, but it was my passion for art, for working with my hands, for shaping clay that truly ignited something in me. I remember once, when I was about 12, I won a regional art competition for a ceramic sculpture I had poured my heart into. It wasn't a grand prize, just a small certificate and a local newspaper mention. I brought it excitedly to Grandma Eleanor, hoping for a flicker of approval. She took the certificate, glanced at it, and then handed it back with a faint smile. "That's nice, dear," she said, her voice distant. "But how will it pay the bills? Your cousin Gavin just aced his math final, you know. Now that will open doors." The words weren't harsh, but they were a dismissal, a quiet redirection towards what she considered true value. Family gatherings were always like that. Praises for Gavin's latest achievement, followed by gentle, well-meaning questions directed at me about my hobby. "Still playing in the mud, Clara?" an aunt would ask, her smile kind, but her eyes revealing a subtle pity. I'd try to explain the intricacies of glazing, the beauty of hand-thrown pottery, the history of ceramics. Their eyes would glaze over. They wanted to hear about job security, bonuses, career paths that fit their definition of success. My quiet artistic world meant nothing in the face of their deeply ingrained beliefs. I often felt like a ghost in my own family. My thoughts, my feelings, my artistic pursuits seemed to drift unheard, unacknowledged. Despite the pain of feeling perpetually misunderstood, I persisted in my art. My small ceramic studio in Asheville, where I lived, became my sanctuary. It was where I truly felt seen, truly felt myself. It was where I found solace and a sense of self-worth that my family so rarely provided. I cherished one thing from Grandma Eleanor, an old, worn copy of a book on Appalachian folklore. It was a gift from years ago, though I couldn't recall her ever explicitly expressing affection when she gave it to me. It just appeared one Christmas. But the stories within its pages, of the land, of ancient crafts, resonated deeply with my artistic spirit. It was the only thing I had from her that felt like it truly belonged to me. Leaving the brownstone after the will reading, I felt a familiar ache, but also a quiet defiance. They could have their millions. I had my art. And somewhere, tucked away, a letter that felt like a final, complicated goodbye from a grandmother I never truly understood. I knew, deep down, that while the family saw an empty page, there had to be more to my story. The days after the will reading passed in a blur of quiet routine. I went back to my studio in Asheville, the familiar scent of clay and damp earth a comforting balm. It was my sanctuary, a place where the sting of my family's dismissal felt less sharp. I immersed myself in my work, shaping clay, glazing pieces, letting the rhythmic motion quiet the lingering ache in my chest. But the thought of that letter, the private letter Mr. Harrison had mentioned, kept tugging at the edges of my mind. It seemed so out of character for Grandma Eleanor. Her communications were always direct, precise, often critical. Deep affections felt like words from a stranger. I couldn't reconcile it with the grandmother I knew, the one who always seemed to find fault, especially with my artistic leanings. I remembered countless childhood moments. Summers at her brownstone in New York felt less like vacations and more like extended examinations. While Gavin was praised for memorizing stock market terms or winning chess games, I was often gently chided. "Clara, why are you always drawing in that sketchbook? Go outside and play a proper game." Or, when I tried to show her a small clay figure I'd made, she'd pat my head distractedly. "That's sweet, dear. But remember, a good education is truly what lasts." It wasn't that she was overtly cruel. It was more subtle, a constant undercurrent of mild disappointment. She seemed to believe art was a frivolous pursuit, a distraction from the real world of business and finance that her family, particularly Gavin, was destined to dominate. My parents, caught between Grandma Eleanor's formidable presence and my quiet nature, rarely intervened. They often echoed her sentiments, softened with worried about my future. "Your grandmother just wants what's best for you, honey," my mother would say, "a secure path." Despite this, there were tiny, fleeting moments that sometimes made me wonder. Moments that, in hindsight, felt like cracks in her carefully constructed facade. I remembered one rainy afternoon when I was about 8 years old. I was drawing in my sketchbook in the living room, a complex fantasy scene. Grandma Eleanor walked in, paused, and without a word, sat down on the armchair opposite me. She didn't comment, didn't criticize. She just watched me draw for a long time. Her gaze was intense, analytical, but it wasn't harsh. When I finally looked up, she simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, then got up and left the room. It was such a small thing, but for a moment I felt truly seen. Another memory, the book. The old, worn copy of Appalachian folklore. It was given to me one Christmas, unwrapped, just left on my bedside table. No fanfare, no special words. I found it later, its pages softened with age, filled with stories of mountain communities, of artisans, of the deep connection between people and the land. I spent hours lost in its pages. It became a comfort, a secret world. I never understood why she gave it to me. Never understood if it was a genuine gift or just an old book she wanted to clear out. But I cherished it, more than any expensive toy or fancy dress. It was the only thing I had from her that felt like it truly belonged to me. These moments were rare, isolated. They were usually quickly overshadowed by another comment about Gavin's achievements or a gentle nudge towards a more practical skill. So, when Mr. Harrison read the will, the public confirmation that I was left nothing felt like the culmination of all those subtle dismissals. It made sense in the context of our long, complicated relationship. A few days later, a formal invitation arrived from Mr. Harrison's office in Asheville. It was terse, direct, requesting my presence for a private meeting. Regarding the private letter from Grandma Eleanor, it read, I stared at the elegant script, baffled. Why a private meeting? For a letter that surely contained just platitudes, a polite farewell? I assumed it was a formality, perhaps a final dismissive note she wanted to deliver in person, even from beyond. I mentioned it to Olivia. She just shrugged. Probably just a sentimental trinket, Clara. Don't get your hopes up for anything significant. You know how Grandma was. Her words echoed my own fears. There was no reason to expect anything different. Yet, the tiny spark of curiosity, fueled by those rare, fleeting echoes of affection, flickered within me. I decided to go. It was, after all, the last piece of my grandmother I would ever receive. Mr. Harrison's office in Asheville was quiet and understated, a stark contrast to the opulence of Grandma Eleanor's brownstone. It was filled with old law books, the scent of aged paper, and a calm, reassuring atmosphere. He greeted me with a gentle smile, ushering me to a comfortable leather chair opposite his desk. There was no formality, no pomp, just a quiet sense of purpose in his eyes. Clara, he began, his voice soft. Thank you for coming. I know the will reading was difficult. He paused, letting the unspoken emotions hang in the air. Grandma Eleanor was a remarkable woman, and a very private one in many ways. He then reached beneath his desk and produced a small, beautifully carved wooden box. It was old, the wood polished smooth by time, with intricate, almost organic patterns etched into its surface. It looked like something from a bygone era, something you'd find in an antique shop, holding forgotten treasures. Grandma Eleanor stipulated that this box and its contents were to be given to you, and only to you. Mr. Harrison explained, his gaze steady. And only after the main will had been read, he placed the box carefully on the desk between us. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for it. It felt cool and smooth against my skin. I lifted the lid. Inside, on top of a stack of old, yellowed legal documents that looked utterly insignificant, rested a single, sealed envelope. It was made of thick, cream-colored paper, and my grandmother's elegant, precise handwriting was unmistakable on the front. For my Clara, to be opened when the time is right. Mr. Harrison gestured towards the letter. This is the private letter I mentioned at the reading. She was very specific about its delivery. I am simply fulfilling her wishes. He leaned back, giving me space, a silent invitation to read it then and there. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a platitude. This was something more. I carefully broke the wax seal. The small crunch, a sharp sound in the quiet office. I unfolded the letter, its pages thin with age. Grandma Eleanor's words filled the page, her familiar, precise script. But the message itself was startling. It didn't speak of disappointment, or even of the affections Mr. Harrison had mentioned. Instead, it spoke of understanding. My dearest Clara, the letter began, you may feel, now, that I have left you nothing. And in the eyes of the world, that may appear to be true. But I know you, Clara. I know your spirit, your gentle heart, your hands that seek to create, and your eyes that see beauty in the earth itself. I felt a lump form in my throat. She knew me? The woman who had always seemed to dismiss my artistic soul? The letter continued, each word carefully chosen. It was a riddle, a puzzle. My true legacy is not in the grand buildings or the bustling city. It lies hidden, where the ancient hills cradle the earth's art, and the spirit of craft finds its voice. There lies the true strength of our roots. It then offered a final, cryptic instruction. Only you, my Clara, with your unique perspective, will know its true value. Look closely at the roots. A letter ended simply, with knowing affection, Eleanor. I reread the letter, my mind reeling. Where the ancient hills cradle the earth's aunt, and the spirit of craft finds its voice. It felt like a direct reference to my ceramics, to my love for working with natural materials. And the roots. What did that mean? I looked up at Mr. Harrison, searching for an explanation. What does this mean? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The roots? The hills? He offered a kind but unrevealing smile. Clara, my instructions were simply to deliver the box and its contents. Grandma Eleanor was a woman who always believed in people discovering things for themselves. She also believed that true value isn't always what's obvious. She would often say, "The most important things are found by those who bother to look beyond the surface." He then gestured towards the stack of old legal documents beneath the letter. "These are just some old land deeds and business agreements from decades ago," he explained. They were in the box with the letter. Probably just sentimental things from her early days in business. They looked utterly uninteresting, yellowed and faded, filled with archaic legal jargon. I barely glanced at them. My mind was consumed by the riddle in the letter. I left Mr. Harrison's office with the wooden box clutched tightly in my hands, a mixture of confusion, intrigue, and a fragile hope blooming in my chest. The letter was so unexpected. It was not a dismissal, but an invitation to solve a puzzle, an invitation to understand a grandmother who had always seemed so distant. And it was all about roots. What roots? My own? The family's? Or something else entirely? I knew I had to find out. Back in my small apartment in Asheville, the wooden box sat on my workbench, a silent challenge. The letter, with its cryptic riddle, was folded carefully beside it. Where the ancient hills cradle the earth's art, and the spirit of craft finds its voice, there lies the true strength of our roots. And then, look closely at the roots. My own studio, filled with the scent of clay and the quiet presence of my finished pieces, felt like the earth's art finding its voice. But ancient hills? That didn't quite fit Asheville, beautiful as it was. Asheville was vibrant and artistic, but the phrase felt older, deeper. I picked up the stack of old legal documents that had been in the box. They were yellowed, brittle, filled with dense, archaic legal terms. I'd barely glanced at them in Mr. Harrison's office. They looked like property deeds, old business agreements from decades ago, probably relating to Grandma Eleanor's early ventures. Nothing that seemed to hold a secret. I set them aside and turned to the one thing I cherished that connected me to her, the old book on Appalachian folklore. It was worn, its cover soft from years of handling, its pages filled with stories of mountain communities, of artisans, of the deep connection between people and the land. I had read it countless times, finding solace in its tales. As I ran my fingers over the spine, a small, almost invisible tear caught my eye. It was at the very bottom, near where the cover met the binding. I pressed gently, and a tiny flap opened, revealing a thin, carefully tucked away object. My heart gave a little jolt. It was an old, hand-drawn map, faded and creased, but still clear enough to make out details. It wasn't a map of New York City or even Asheville. It showed winding mountain roads, dotted lines indicating trails, and a cluster of buildings marked simply as the Hollow. It was a remote valley, deep in Appalachia, somewhere in Virginia. I recognized a few geographical markers that subtly hinted at the landscape I knew from my research into traditional Appalachian crafts. Regions known for their rich clay deposits and generations of skilled artisans. This had to be it, where the ancient hills cradle the earth's art, the Appalachian Mountains. And the spirit of craft finds its voice. That resonated perfectly with the community of artisans. And roots? This map felt like the root of something, a starting point. I remembered Grandma Eleanor talking about her younger days before she became the formidable businesswoman the family knew. She sometimes mentioned visiting rural communities, learning about traditional crafts. I had always dismissed it as youthful idealism, but now it felt like a crucial piece of the puzzle. This map was likely from those early days, a personal record of a place that meant something to her. A memory surfaced, clearer now. One summer when I was very small, maybe 5 or 6, Grandma Eleanor had taken me on a trip. It wasn't to a fancy resort. It was to a place with winding dirt roads where the air smelled of pine and damp earth, and where I remembered seeing women weaving on large looms in open-air sheds. I hadn't thought much of it then, just a hazy, nostalgic memory. But now, connecting it to the map, it felt significant. She must have taken me to this very place, or somewhere very much like it. She had subtly exposed me to the world she spoke of in the letter, even when I was too young to understand. A sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion washed over me. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about understanding my grandmother, about unraveling a secret side of her that no one else in the family seemed to know. The woman they saw as cold and materialistic had kept a hidden passion, a quiet connection to the very things I loved. I traced the faded lines of the map with my finger. The village, the hollow, seemed almost hidden, tucked away from the main roads. It was a place you wouldn't stumble upon by accident. It was a place you had to seek out. I knew, with a sudden, fierce certainty, that I had to go there. This wasn't just a riddle from a will. It was an invitation to discover a piece of my own history, a shared heritage with the grandmother I thought had left me nothing. I booked a small rental car, packed a bag, and prepared for a journey that felt less like a quest for an inheritance and more like a pilgrimage to a lost part of my family's soul. The drive from Asheville into rural Virginia was a journey back in time. The highways gradually gave way to smaller winding roads, then to unpaved tracks that snaked deeper into the Appalachian Mountains. The air grew cooler, smelling of pine and damp earth. My cell service flickered, then died, cutting me off from the world I knew. It felt strangely liberating. The map, unfolded on the passenger seat, guided me. It was surprisingly accurate for a hand-drawn sketch, testament to Grandma Eleanor's meticulous nature. The terrain became steeper, the forests denser, and then, nestled in a fold of the hills, just as the map indicated, I saw a wisp of smoke curling from a chimney. Then another, and then a small cluster of modest, well-maintained buildings. The Hollow, I whispered, recognizing the name from the map. The village was unassuming, nothing like the bustling modern cities my family inhabited. It was a place where time seemed to move at a different pace. Small homes, a general store, and a few larger workshop-like structures made up the core of the community. As I drove slowly down the main track, a few people looked up from their chores, offering polite but curious glances. I parked my car and got out, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of birds and the gentle rustle of leaves. I wasn't sure where to start or what exactly I was looking for. The riddle had mentioned the spirit of craft, and my gut told me to look for places where things were made. I walked towards one of the larger buildings, drawn by the faint sounds of rhythmic clacking. As I approached, I realized it was a workshop. Inside, several women were seated at large looms, their hands moving with incredible speed and precision, weaving intricate patterns into vibrant textiles. The colors were rich, the designs unique, clearly handcrafted with immense skill. It was breathtaking. This was the spirit of craft finding its voice. I introduced myself, a little awkwardly at first, explaining that my grandmother, Eleanor, used to speak of this place. The women looked at me with a mixture of surprise and a gentle warmth. An older woman, with kind eyes and hands stained with natural dyes, smiled. "Eleanor? Oh yes, Eleanor Sterling. She was a dear friend. We called her the benefactor here. The benefactor? I repeated, confused. My grandmother, the benefactor? The woman, whose name was Martha, invited me in. She told me stories of Grandma Eleanor I had never heard. She spoke of how, decades ago, when this community was struggling, Eleanor had arrived. Not with grand pronouncements, but with a quiet, practical vision. She had seen the raw talent of the weavers and potters here, the rich clay deposits, the traditional knowledge that was slowly fading. She invested in us, Clara, Martha explained, her voice soft. Not with a handout, but with tools, with training, with a way to connect our crafts to markets beyond these hills. She helped us build these workshops, established fair prices for our work, and ensured our children could learn these traditions. She showed me another building, a ceramic studio, filled with kilns and pottery wheels. This is where our potters work. Your grandmother was particularly fond of the clay from our valley. She said it had a living spirit. My heart ached with understanding. This was the earth's art. As I walked through the village, meeting more people, hearing more stories, a picture of Grandma Eleanor began to emerge that was completely different from the one held by my family. This was a woman who quietly, meticulously, invested in people, in culture, in community. She hadn't just given money. She had given opportunity, dignity, and a future. Then, Martha led me to a small, unassuming office building in the center of the village. This is the heart of it all, she said, the collective's administrative hub. Eleanor set it all up. She called it Eleanor's Roots. And then I saw it. On the wall, among old photographs of the collective's beginnings, was a framed document. It was a formal legal agreement detailing the establishment of Eleanor's Roots Artisanal Collective, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and promoting Appalachian crafts. And below it, clearly visible, were legal papers, updated just a few years ago, indicating the direct ownership and oversight of this entire thriving entity. My eyes scanned the small print, and then they landed on it, a name listed as the sole proprietor, the primary benefactor, the ultimate legal guardian of Eleanor's Roots. It was my name, Clara. I pulled out the stack of old legal documents from the wooden box, the ones I had barely glanced at in Mr. Harrison's office. They weren't insignificant at all. They were the original deeds, the founding agreements, the meticulous transfer of ownership. Grandma Eleanor hadn't just set this up. She had carefully, quietly transferred its legal guardianship to me. The roots she spoke of in her letter weren't just the cultural roots of the craft. They were the very legal and operational roots of this entire incredible enterprise. This was her true legacy, a hidden empire of artistry and community, bequeathed not to the financially astute, but to the one who understood its heart. Standing in that unassuming office, holding those faded legal documents, I felt a shift within me. It wasn't just shock. It was a profound understanding that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just a place. This was Eleanor's Roots, a vibrant, self-sustaining ecosystem of art and community. And it was all mine. I looked around the small office. There were filing cabinets, a worn desk, and a simple computer. But on the walls, alongside the old photographs of the collective's beginnings, were detailed financial ledgers, growth projections, and meticulously organized records of every sale, every artisan's earnings, every community program funded. This wasn't some quaint charity project. It was a meticulously managed, highly successful, ethical enterprise. Martha, who had quietly followed me in, smiled. Eleanor always said this was her greatest accomplishment, she murmured, her voice filled with admiration. She built it from the ground up, Clara. She poured her heart into it. And she kept it a secret from the people who might not have understood its true value. I thought of my family in New York, their focus on visible wealth, on corporate mergers and financial statements. They would never have seen the value in this. They would have seen only a small, rural enterprise, perhaps dismissed it as a distraction from real business. Grandma Eleanor had known that, She had deliberately shielded this precious legacy from their materialistic gaze. She used to visit here every few months, right up until her health declined, Martha continued. She knew everyone by name, remembered their children, celebrated every success. She wasn't just an investor, she was a true partner, a mentor. She taught us how to manage, how to market, how to connect with the world without losing our soul. The pieces of the puzzle began to click into place, forming a picture of Grandma Eleanor I had never been allowed to see. The cold, distant matriarch who seemed obsessed with financial success in New York was here, in these quiet hills, a passionate benefactor, a shrewd businesswoman whose vision extended far beyond mere profit. She hadn't just built a collective, she had built a community, a sustainable future for these artisans, rooted in their ancient crafts. The riddle in her letter suddenly made perfect sense. Where the ancient hills cradle the earth's art, and the spirit of craft finds its voice, there lies the true strength of our roots. It wasn't just poetic language, it was a literal map to this place, to this hidden legacy. And look closely at the roots. It meant the foundation, the very legal framework of this organization, which she had carefully placed in my hands. She had trusted me, the quiet artist, the one who supposedly had no. I thought about the nothing in her will. It was a test. A brilliant, subtle test. She had stripped away all material expectations, forcing me to confront my own value system. If I was only chasing money, I would have walked away from the sentimental trinket of a letter, ignored the old documents, and never embarked on this journey. But my curiosity, my connection to art, and my innate desire to understand her had led me right to her true masterpiece. This hidden legacy was far more valuable than any inheritance of properties or stocks. It was a living, breathing entity, impacting lives, preserving culture, creating beauty, and it was mine to protect and grow. I spent the next few days in the valley, absorbing everything. I talked to the weavers, the potters, the young apprentices. I saw the pride in their eyes, the dignity in their work. I witnessed the direct impact of Grandma Eleanor's vision. She had built a quiet empire of artistry and community, hidden in plain sight, ensuring it would be passed to someone who understood its true value, someone who genuinely cared about the craft and the people behind it. When I finally returned to Asheville, and then to New York City for the family meeting I knew I had to call, I felt a sense of calm power I had never known. I wasn't the dismissed Clara anymore. I was the guardian of Eleanor's roots, and it was time for the family to finally see. I arrived at Grandma Eleanor's brownstone in New York City with a quiet confidence I hadn't possessed before. The air was still thick with the lingering scent of old money and unspoken expectations, but this time it didn't feel suffocating. I had requested a family meeting, a formal gathering, and surprisingly, everyone had shown up. Gavin was there, looking sleek and self-assured. Olivia, my parents, various aunts and uncles, all assembled. Gavin scoffed, a small dismissive sound. The deep affections letter? Come on, Clara. We all know that was just a sentimental formality. Grandma left you nothing of substance. I ignored him. I pulled out the antique wooden box, placing it on the polished mahogany table. I then laid out the old, yellowed legal documents from within it. The ones they had all assumed were insignificant. These, I said, gesturing to the documents, are not just old papers. They are the legal foundation of something Grandma Eleanor built, something far more valuable than any property in this city. I then calmly recounted my journey to the remote Appalachian Valley, explaining the community I found there. I spoke of the Hollow, of Martha, and of the thriving artisanal collective dedicated to preserving ancient weaving and pottery techniques. I described the workshops, the fair trade practices, the educational programs. I saw their expressions change, from polite disinterest to confusion, then to dawning disbelief. Gavin's smug smile vanished. Olivia's eyes widened. My parents looked utterly bewildered. Grandma Eleanor, under the guise of an old friend, secretly funded and developed this entire community for decades, I explained. She poured her personal wealth, her time, and her incredible business acumen into building Eleanor's roots. I then presented the final documents, the ones clearly bearing my name as the sole owner and inheritor. These documents confirm my ownership of the entire collective, I stated, my gaze meeting each of theirs. Grandma Eleanor meticulously transferred its legal guardianship to me, ensuring it would be passed to someone who understood its true value. A stunned silence fell over the room. No one spoke. Gavin's jaw had literally dropped. My parents, who had always worried about my unprofitable hobby and my lack of a real job, looked absolutely flabbergasted. Mr. Harrison, sensing the moment, spoke up, his voice calm and clear. Grandma Eleanor was a woman of immense vision. She believed that true value isn't always what's visible on a balance sheet. She had a profound respect for Clara's quiet integrity and her genuine artistic spirit. She believed Clara was the only one capable of truly understanding and nurturing this legacy, away from purely commercial interests. He paused, then added, "The nothing in the public will, as Clara has discovered, was a deliberate act. It was a test, a way to ensure that this profound inheritance would be passed to someone who valued its artistic and community impact above all else, rather than merely its financial potential." The truth, undeniable and immense, settled upon them. Gavin, who had always been the golden child, destined for financial inheritance, now looked utterly deflated. Olivia was speechless, her conventional worldview momentarily shattered. My parents stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and a visible, painful realization. They had judged me, dismissed me, compared me to others, all while Grandma Eleanor was secretly nurturing a legacy meant for me. A legacy that resonated with my very soul. It wasn't just about inheriting an empire, it was about inheriting a purpose, a connection to a deeper, more meaningful form of wealth. I stood there, not just as the inheritor of a hidden fortune, but as the rightful guardian of a profound cultural and ethical enterprise, far more valuable than the material wealth the rest of the family had been granted. The family, now realizing the true extent of Grandma Eleanor's hidden wisdom and my profound connection to it, was left humbled and speechless. The meeting dispersed quietly. There were no apologies, not yet, but there was a shift, a respect in their eyes that had never been there before. The quiet artist, the family outsider, had been entrusted with a hidden treasure, a legacy far more valuable than anything publicly declared.